Hello, world. Thank you for joining us out there. My name is Brian Piper, and I am the Mellon Foundation Assistant Curator of Photographs at the New Orleans Museum of Art. Through the magic of Zoom, I am coming at you today from the unceded lands of the Chitimacha and Choctaw people in a place called Bulbancha, and also New Orleans. As part of our programming for our exhibition, New Photography, Create, Collect, Compile, which gathers 4 photographers working with and critiquing new and emerging ways that we use photography today, all of them with an eye towards the history of the media. And through their work, each of these artists are thinking about how those practices and histories have been about identity, community, power, and also resistance. So by way of introduction, it is my pleasure to speak today with Elliott Brown Jr., one of those artists. He's a New York-based artist who considers how we live and move around photographs and how identity informs how one participates in photography, from making to posing and to viewing photographs. Elliott holds a BFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, and he has held residencies, as varied as the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. Did I say that correctly, Elliott? Okay. And the Baxter Street at the Camera Club of New York, and here in New Orleans at the St. Roch Community Church, which led in part to a solo show at Staple Goods Gallery, which has one of my favorite names for a photo exhibition ever, Never in a Hurry. I just love that. In print and online, you might have seen Elliott's work in W Magazine, New York Times, Out Magazine, and Aperture. Elliott, I think you've managed to keep extremely busy this year against all odds. You're also showing in Chicago now, and maybe some other places that you'll tell us about. He's really created an ambitious installation here at NOMA for the exhibition that includes elements of portraiture, conceptual photography, sculpture, and even architecture. And with that, Elliott, welcome to NOMA's Zoom account. And please tell us a little bit about yourself and what's really exciting to you as an artist currently.
Yeah, sure. Well, one, thank you for including me in the exhibition, and then also kind of offering up this time to share with you so that it can be shared with a wider audience, my thoughts around the show and my process of making it. I mean, you covered a lot of, what I would offer the public about me right now.
Sorry to take words out of your mouth.
No, I'm from New York. I grew up on Long Island, and most of my sensibility as a portrait photographer is inspired by like a respect for people's space. So I try to make work that itself is a reflection of the way in which I participate in other folks' lives, but as well is a reminder to myself of how I want to carry myself in relationship to others. So the images often are of intimate moments, things that I'm permitted based on my relationship with the people in the photographs. But the images are not straightforward in that they're often fictionalized in terms of the context in which they're presented. And this is happening less often, but it was more prevalent in earlier portraits, or at least portraits not made in this year. But I look to abstract how people show up in the images so that they aren't as readily available. And yeah, that's for a number of reasons, and we can get into that.
Sure.
Since some of that ethos inspired the installations here at the show.
Great. I mean, sort of following up on that is I've seen you describe it in other places as one of your goals as a portraitist is to reveal something inherent about the person, but also leave them a modicum of privacy. Mm-hmm. Why is that important to you, and how do you go about that?
I think that's important to me because in general, I seek to kind of I seek to kind of see the way that things are operating as opposed to imposing like my own understanding of the way in which they work. And I see like my practice is kind of like a gesture to the unique ways in which each of us kind of arrive in the present moment. So a lot of us share quite a bit, but the unique way in which those things compile themselves into our individual self is something that I want to give credence to. And the gesture of privacy is also kind of like a remark to myself to be patient in the way I seek things, be patient in the way that I, compose an understanding of something. So I think about privacy and patience as working hand in hand. Whereas I think in the past, I've emphasized privacy more as like a tool for power. So what goes into being able to read an image, who has the access to being able to read the signifiers in an image. And I think that's still present. But I think where my mind is presently at is in privacy's relationship to patience.
Yeah, that's really refreshing to me, because I mean, if you think of, the history of photography, for so long is also a kind of violence and objectification often of subjects, especially, subjects of color throughout the history of photography. So it's a really refreshing approach. I also think of you as a photographer of interior spaces and people's homes. You're smiling, but do you think of yourself that way, or is that, how are those related?
I don't remember who shared this with me. Sorry, but it was definitely a stranger. But I was kind of like looking at photographs that I had made on my phone, and this person was, eavesdropping on what I was doing on my phone, and they were like, "Do you make real estate images?" And I was like, no, I don't, but I guess in some ways I do. So I think about that a lot. How, but now, or maybe not, but now, but how sometimes like the unembellished nature and like nature, candid nature of the photographs lead people to thinking about why is this a photograph, and if it is a photograph, maybe it has a more logistical purpose than an artistic.
Were you on the train when that happened?
I think I might have been on the bus or like waiting for the bus.
Yeah, that's one of those things that happens in that space. But I think that goes back to our discussion about your portraits. I mean, that movement from interior to exterior, and these are very private spaces that people inhabit. And I think that's a whole conversation that I think we can get into as we go into some images. Are you ready to do that? Let's here's me trying to share my screen. Okay, great. Okay. I do want to, as a disclaimer, I do want to say that all of these artworks are courtesy of the artist and his gallery. And unless noted, they're all pigmented ink prints. They're on a variety of mounts that we can talk about as we move through. But this first one, I just want to sort of maybe start with some questions about your process, like when you're on set or what have you with your subjects. Where do you start? What are you thinking about, and how do you approach that?
So there's a variety of methods that lead me to producing a photograph, but with these two photographs that work together, this being the first of two, it began with an observation of myself within a bar, and this was made in New Orleans, and I was at a bar called the Phoenix. I was there, and I was just there by myself, and kind of like needing a place to like think, but also be surrounded by movement.
Mm.
So I thought that was kind of interesting, you know, to want to kind of be, but amidst strangers.
Mhm.
Um, it's kind of like, you know, like a night within a nightlife setting. Um, and that year that I was in New Orleans, I had been thinking a lot about nightlife, and the various possibilities of nightlife to kind of like have like a meditative moment within a nightlife setting. And I had composed this image in my head while I was
Mm.
at the bar as I was observing another person who appeared to be alone for a while, but maybe, you know, had some friends come later on. And yeah, I wanted to make an image of someone in contemplation, and in this specific instance, someone in mourning.
Mm.
Uh, Mourning what is kind of like, you know, up for for myself included. And yeah, I wanted to see an image of someone in mourning, but I also wanted to see them like being supported somehow.
Yeah.
So with this first image, you know, I had like briefly propped
Mhm.
space, but there was light really. So the, you know, the LED strip is something that I added to the bar. It's lit with my own equipment. And then I bought these like mirror square plates from Home Depot, just so to like kind of make the space seem a little larger.
Mhm.
I should buy enough enough of them, which weird thing exists. But I thought, you know, in a if this were to be, you know, if this were a bar space, I don't really think anybody would question why this mirror doesn't continue on throughout the entire surface. And then there are three presences in addition to like the actual figure here.
Mm.
So there's the hand being held from out of the frame, that being the most obvious presence. Then there is the oval picture frame that is turned face down onto the mirror, but you know, close enough where it's not reflecting what's in
Mm.
the back to the viewer. And then this hanger here, this pink hanger that I placed in front of the camera, um, because I wanted to talk about and the hanger was just an easy way for me to kind of reference the presence of another
Yeah.
person.
I well, first of all, I mean, I'm sort of a sucker for pictures within pictures, and people using photographs and being around other photographs is a common theme in a lot of your work, that I find really exciting. But also the way you often use the margins to sort of hint at a larger story and inviting the viewer to imagine what else is happening. And this hand attaches to this figure.
Yeah, and initially was this was not intended to be a photograph. I kind of asked this person who was also in the room with us as we were making as we were working on the shoot. I asked him to just lend his hand to this person, and that the first image is really the image that I wanted. But then as I was making that image, I was maybe doing it for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I turned and like noticed how intent his eyes look, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
this like later shot, so maybe he was tired or exhausted.
Mm.
These two people don't necessarily have a relationship to one another, but his eyes like looked very focused in on this person, and very concerned for the person. But then in addition, like the kind of production elements via the flashlight, and then him holding his phone to provide additional light. Um, and then like, you know, the water bottle is there, like that was just, you know, I brought waters so that, you know, there's during the shoot, that can situation there was just like to be used as a prop in the shoot. So he was kind of in like a fully behind the scenes area.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't intended to capture, but I really liked I guess the tension between like the production of the photograph and what felt like an intentional gesture on his part via his gaze and the concern of his hand holding. So the image is titled Pruning Grout because I had been thinking of, I titled the image when I had moved back to New York, and I work in New York as a caretaker for a historic house museum. So a lot of gardening, a lot of yeah, a lot of maintenance. So I had been in the process of like pruning back trees and whatnot, and like thinking about what that gesture, thinking about that gesture of removing something to kind of like keep it going.
Yeah.
Being the thing that you use in between tiles to keep things together. So this additive process that keeps something that keeps a hold. I wanted to offer that, both of those qualities to his own gesture of support to the person in the first frame.
Yeah, I love that. I can I ask a little bit about how you come up with titles for your work, because they're all very poetic and evocative of so many things.
Sure. So often, again, that's another thing where the titles come out of a variety of means. But so I'll speak specifically to the first photograph. I have been doing, I like, I write to myself. I'm not a writer, but it's sometimes a tool that I employ. And I had just been reflecting on Whitney Houston and like thinking about like the um, the kind of like omnipresence of her stardom. So I had wrote this vignette about her like being on stage, but then also being a member of the audience at the same time. And the text that accompanies this first image is abstracted from, or rather, it's taken, or sorry, it's excerpted from that longer writing about this experience that Whitney Houston is having. Um, so I wanted to kind of like describe somebody who was like both like really transcendent but also really low at the same time, and maybe using music as some sort of salvation. um, but when I offered it to this image, uh, I like that it felt as though she could have been reflecting on a memory of her relationship with another person.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of specifically liked this part about she took delight in her best effort to keep up. Um, and this idea that, perhaps this was a relationship with somebody that was out of pace, that to some extent she enjoyed trying to um, keep up with it, keep up with the terms of it, but eventually it kind of gave out. And here is this instance of mourning to reflect that.
Thank you. From titles to three pieces that in the show that are untitled, that are maybe the most ambitious things and maybe the most challenging in the installation. I don't want to say too much, and just sort of let you introduce the next wall.
Sure. So I mentioned to you yesterday that I really like, this is probably my favorite installation image of all of the images, because of the way it juxtaposes this full color image alongside this redacted image. So, I wanted to make a photograph that was, or I wanted to make an installation with a photograph that delayed the viewing experience of it to some extent. So I kept thinking about an exhibition that, and this is still kind of like an idea in my mind of an exhibition of just walls. quarterly just walls, but they all kind of have some subtlety to them that you may miss, and maybe the gallery or museum markers might be able to help you navigate. Still requires your effort to see. So there's a series of 3 photographs that were made using silkscreen ink directly onto the wall surface. And this is an idea that I kind of conceptualized, and these are my photographs. And I did some tests on my own in New York with a different process that would have used vinyl. But ultimately we went with silkscreen, and this is something that was done. This is something that was done by Tony Campbell directly onto the wall on my behalf. And my direction was to use an ink that was just light or dark enough from the walls so that it appeared like a silhouette of the image on the wall, to the point where maybe you may miss it. So because this is like, my first kind of like go at this technique, there are things that I would change. Or I love like, I love what it's offering to start with. But I think my secondary purpose in making the images in this way was to also find a way to reconcile the significance of the gallery space itself. Like, why this space for work? Why show work in these spaces? And part of my beginning to answer that question was to work with the architecture of the thing itself. So the images themselves are not site specific and that direct response to New Orleans Museum of Art or in of New Orleans Museum of Art's history or any of the history of that land. But it is site specific in that it uses the material of the institution itself to realize it.
Of a museum space.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
One of the things that appeals to me or I find exciting about this is, when we turn the gallery over, our team will do the usual sort of patch and paint, but these images will remain, under a coat of paint, and they're part of the museum and that gallery space now. And I think that's somewhat profound. I mean, also the fact that these required photography or photographic processes at least 2 times to be made, right? You took the photograph and then it's impressed on the screen print matrix with light as well. And then it requires so much concentration on the part of the viewer to see. I think in your instructions, you told us, maybe even it takes 3 times to look at it and see what you're looking at, right?
Yeah. And I just had a thought in my head, but it's kind of left me.
If it comes back, I mean, another thing that I think, you've talked about the history of them. Oh, go ahead. You got it.
Yeah. Circling back to your point about, this will always kind of exist within the context of this particular gallery space in the museum. That's something that's a design element that I'm interested within the photographs themselves. So even in work that's not included here, a lot of the images that I have made are images that are made in New York, and they're often made in transient home spaces. So people who have not lived in these places for very long, but still the markers of time like exist in the walls themselves. So there's a particular photograph that I often come back to called On Ice, that was originally supposed to be used in some capacity for this installation. But one of the things that draws me back to that photograph is the way in which the oil paint on the walls kind of like has built up, like the thickness of it on the walls, which is likely because of how many times the apartment itself has been turned over. So I like seeing this, or just because somebody painted it to you. But I like seeing, that significance or making significance out of that detail.
Yeah, yeah. That's another thing that it makes me think of is, I mean, in terms of, photography depends on contrast in a lot of ways to make us, it's one of its qualities is ability to render that. And you've really sort of stepped on that so that there's, such low contrast in this. You think of Roy de Carava, right? Really, stressing, taking out the contrast and stressing film's ability to do that as well. And I think it's challenging to us as viewers, but it's also in tune with a photographic history here. Okay, so we're going to turn to a series of 5 photographs, and I'll scroll through them slowly and silently, and then we can talk about them. Maybe it's just the way my mind works, but when I look at a sequence like that, I start to think about narrative. Is that something you're thinking of when you're selecting an edit like this, or are you focusing on other aspects?
Sorry.
No, that's
Someone sent me an important text just now. But as I was looking through the images as you scroll through them, I myself was also kind of like reflecting on why these images were chosen to be together. And at I think always what's a part of the relationship between the images, the aesthetic interest. So I thought I had them all on the wall. They're not on the wall anymore. But yeah, so there are some like formal gestures that I think complement one another. But I think, yeah, a lot of the time when I make photographs, especially recently, I'm really interested in how you kind of like organize chaos. You, yeah, like how do you make organized chaos into a photograph? And I think a lot of the photographs like depict like things in kind of like this topsy-turvy kind of haphazard way. There's a lot of collaging, like somewhat kaleidoscopic views of things.
Mhm.
I love so much the image of the table kind of like flipped over as these people are still kind of like performing an intimate act. So, even though I'm aware of how that image is created, I still look at that and I go, "What the hell?"
Yeah.
What was this? Oh no, not this one.
Oh,
The third.
that one. Yeah.
So like being in this kiddie pool and this umbrella, it looks like something destructive has taken place here. People are finding themselves within it and finding a bond within it, an intimate. So that really is kind of like both a metaphor for my life, but also a metaphor for or a great way to understand like my practice overall. Is people's like discovery of interest within.
Yeah. I mean, you say organized chaos, but it also sort of brings me back to a lot of your work has obstruction and sort of using the margins to sort of exclude some information about the subjects. And I think that to me, it turns back to your interest in privacy and leaving your subjects something for themselves. And I believe other people have written about, paying attention to the margins in your work and it being more important than the center, than what's actually going on, or what's in the middle of the photograph. Is that something you are concerned with, or something that interests you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think about it as being more important in the center. I think
Mm.
about them as on par with one another. But the margins have always been a really great way for me to introduce what is already clear. And when you view a photograph, that something is taking place outside of the frame that has been chosen not to be included. But I think I want to draw people's attention to the fact that it's not included by including some kind of crop
Mhm.
uh, or some kind of cropping of it, so that it does still kind of like inform again the central act, what's
Yeah.
happening. Yeah, what seems to be the main takeaway, and then how is the main takeaway undermined or added to by what's happening in the margin.
I think that's so much of, our title says create, collect, compile, but I think your work is important in the in the series of 4, because it does remind us that exclusion and omission is also part of photography, and it's what, I don't know, it's political in a lot of ways, because of that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Right. Well, so I want to, this series is also part of the architecture of the gallery now. And this is what you'll sort of see as you come into the room. But I thought this might be a good place to talk about your studio practice and your vision. Um, this It's been an interesting, run putting this together, because COVID created some challenges in the way that our team produced it, and whether or not you could be here. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process, and how you get from idea to fruition, and what might be different?
yeah. So I am primarily a photographer, and trust my hand there the most. But I also am interested in creating like unique experiences for the images to be viewed in.
Mhm.
So this was yet another installation that was born out of wanting to work with the museum's architecture directly,
Mhm.
and then as well delaying the viewer's experience of the image. So I like the possibility that a viewer could walk into the space and again think that maybe something isn't on the wall, or just if even for a second.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sorry.
that no, that's all right. Um, I like the idea that the viewer could like walk into the space and maybe just for a second think that the wall was vacant, um, as opposed to having like a protruding frame structure, um, like the first 2 images that we discussed
Mhm.
come off the wall, which is I think the usual experience of imagery. But yeah, I wanted to kind of like sink images um, into the wall, or make it appear as though the images themselves are sunk into the wall. And this is, another instance in which my plan was to kind of like, this, the resulting structure here almost kind of looks like it frames like a polyptych, as opposed to
Mhm.
uh, these being images like actually embedded in the wall themselves. And I think that's because you can tell the ends of the cabinet. So it feels like, if you were to take this down, all 5 of these photographs come with it. Whereas, I was interested in something that was actually embedded within the wall itself. Um, and, I still haven't really kind of like made peace with why I want that to be, outside of the same reason for the silkscreen.
Mhm.
Um, how can I delay the viewer's experience, but then as well, how can I make the gallery space make sense for the
Mhm.
work?
So we move from this in the gallery, and there's another piece, and the title of the wall that's coming out is She Has Yet to Make It Right. But I think you described to us that the effect is as if the walls of the gallery are lifting out from the wall. Can you talk a little more about that?
So I think this kind of, this is like the most, I don't know, I'm blanking on the word, but this gesture is kind of like the most useful in, I think, what my goal is in these kind of like site-specific installations.
Mhm.
I think I'm interested in kind of creating construction sites
Mm.
out of the space itself. Again, in reference to my own thinking through of like, what is the compatibility between the artist, their vision, and the space in which they're showing in. But then as well to think about construction more generally. A lot of the work or the research that I've been doing for new work now is just about kind of probing at the foundation of a thing and thinking in some cases quite literally about the foundation of homes, foundation of buildings,
Mm.
that which kind of like enables us to, do everything. Emotional capacity of foundation as a term as well. And yeah, I think I want to draw attention to these things that are otherwise taken for granted. So if I am to kind of turn them, like, these walls into a construction space of some sort, what like critical possibilities are available through that act of making this a space that's in flux as opposed to a space that is finished. And I think my images work in that way as well. That their interpretation and their meaning is constantly in flux. Which isn't to say that anybody should just be coming up and like throwing an idea up and then that's what the image is about. But more so that the images are not created with the intention to be understood, or with the intention to be comprehensive or narrative in a particular way.
Yeah, and I mean your work appears in so many places, right? On websites and in print, and here in a gallery, it's the biggest photograph in the museum right now, and that's mounted on plywood, and it can change. One thing that I find fascinating with your installation here is that people can move around it in a different way, and without touching it, stick their head in the between the boards and look at it in different ways. And I think that makes you physically relate to the photograph in a different way, right?
Yeah, I think about the image that is behind this photograph.
Mm-hmm.
It already is a blurred image, but I think about it as kind of like a ghastly presence, what you might put in like a construction site, like these plastic tarps that you use over doors to kind of like keep dust in or out. Yeah, I liked being able to animate that kind of material with this image that it itself is already kind of ghostly. So it kind of offering something to the front view.
Right on. A lot of people have asked where this She Has Yet to Make It Right, where you made that photograph. Can I ask that real quickly?
Yeah, it's made in New Orleans.
People see this gentleman with dollars pinned to him for his birthday, and they always ask if that was made in New Orleans. Well, I'm gonna stop sharing here.